Maybe I've been too harsh. I've been pretty skeptical about Dragon Age the Veilguard, mostly because I've had my doubts that current age Bioware can deliver an RPG experience that appeals to me and most fans, I'd say, of RPGs. I tend to look for games that have interesting choices to make, a vast world, great NPCs, factions, characters to learn about, and not just purely action, hack and slash combat. I prefer some tactics in there, something that relates to me building my character in a more meaningful way, and Bioware has struggled with a lot of that lately, so I haven't been too excited for the Veilguard. But maybe I was wrong, maybe I wasn't thinking about what's really important, because it seems that Bioware's top priority, its goal for the Veilguard, isn't to be the best RPG of all time, it's instead to be the most diverse RPG of all time, the most inclusive game that you've ever played. That's their mission, that's what they really care about. And Game Informer, Games Media, they went into the Bioware offices to do a bit of journalism, and rather than asking them the hard-hitting questions, let's talk about the game, the content, how good is it, what's the quality like, no, none of that really matters. It's purely about how inclusive is it? Can everyone be involved? I hope no one is left out, regardless of their skill level or whatever else. And they've written this article, a look at Dragon Age, the Veilguard's difficulty options and gameplay customization. Throughout my visit to Bioware's Edmonton office, game director Corinne Bush reiterates that the studio designed the game with inclusivity in mind. That's extremely evident in the character creator, where players begin their journey in Veilguard. It's easily the best character creator in series history, and possibly the most robust I've ever seen in a video game. The best character creator of all time. How did they come to that conclusion? Do you think it's because there were so many interesting skills to choose from? Maybe traits, different factions to start with, backgrounds? Do you think that was it? Do you think that's how they're judging this? Or do you think instead it's about how far down the LGBTQ plus alphabet can you go with your character? How many feminine voices are there for male characters, for instance? Those are the real issues that are important when it comes to the character creator. And continuing from hundreds of sliders and options to customize your player-controlled rook, to the ability to pick pronouns separate from gender, and more. This character creator speaks directly to the inclusivity of Veilguard. But that feeling, it does not end in the character creator. It also extends to the world. Ice Mage and private detective companion Neve Gallus has a prosthetic leg, for example. Now, I'm not happy about this because I'm feeling for all of our wheelchair-bound adventurers who are not being represented here. Did you know that in Dungeons & Dragons now, the evil lords, the sorcerers who have castles, they install wheelchair ramps? I'm not kidding, that's an actual thing. You do a dungeon and there's wheelchair ramps. So if you've got a wheelchair-bound party member, they can come into the dungeon and fight evil alongside you. Bioware don't seem to have thought of this. They've lost points. You're not going to win most inclusive game of the year when you're doing this. A prosthetic leg isn't good enough in 2024. Before starting the game proper, a playstyle screen allows players to customize various options affecting how Veilguard plays. Here you can select difficulty, or playstyle as Bioware calls it, with options like Storyteller, for those interested more in the story versus the combat. Adventurer for an experience that seemingly balances the story and combat, and a difficulty called Nightmare. There might be more, but this is all I can see during my demo. At any point during Veilguard, you can change the game's difficulty, unless you select Nightmare, which is the hardest of difficulties. That's a permanent selection. Don't you just love how far we've come? Back in the days of Wolfenstein 3D, I think it was like if you picked the easiest mode, the game would insult you and it would say, "Are you a wuss? Crank up the difficulty a little bit. Have a little bit of challenge in your life." Now we've pivoted into the exact opposite direction of that, where instead of just easy, medium, or hard, you've got Storyteller, because easy might imply that the person playing, they can't handle anything more than that. They're easy mode, they're a bit of a loser, so we've got Storyteller instead. And I don't say that as any sort of flex for myself either. I've played plenty of games. Halfway through, I thought, I can't be fucked with this combat really anymore. I'm going to turn down to the lightest difficulty, just get through it, get through the story, and move on. I'm sure most people have done that at least once, and it's okay. You don't need to tiptoe around us, walk on eggshells. Just call it easy mode. You're not going to offend most people, I would think. Although current day Bioware fans, maybe they would get upset. But the worrying trend I see is it felt like in older games, easy mode was there and you could have enemies with maybe less health, you have more health. It didn't take a lot of effort for the developer. But now Bioware's almost saying, Storyteller is a mode of the game that is just as valid as the harder modes, where the combat is actually relevant and you can maybe die. It seems like in Storyteller, there is no chance of dying. You're fine, you just go through, and you, as the name suggests, consume only the story content. Well, the issue I have is Bioware's mindset is Storyteller just as valid as everything else, and they might think, oh, because we have so many precious players, maybe 30% of people will pick that mode. They only want to go through the story. They don't want to see any combat and take that risk. How much effort are the devs then actually spending on the combat? If you're thinking that a big chunk of people won't possibly engage in combat. And if that is your thinking, it leads me to believe that combat might be pretty worthless. It certainly looked that way in the gameplay trailer. You couldn't do a whole lot of anything with the companions. It was basically hack and slash. They've been dumbing down the combat in every Dragon Age game as the series has continued. Origins, quite tactical, quite interesting, spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate. We get to Dragon Age 2, a bit more action. Then you get to Inquisition, anything tactical was almost worthless. They went all in on the action side, maybe they saw success with Mass Effect, and they just abandoned any of those RPG roots. But looking at these difficulty settings, it's kind of telling me that Bioware's approach to combat now, the reason there's nothing tactical isn't because EA, their big bosses, said it's going to be accessible. I think it's the development team. That they think that if combat is interesting, it requires you to use your brain for more than 5 seconds. They see that as an accessibility problem, and that's not acceptable. This game has to allow anyone in. It doesn't matter if they're maybe a little bit retarded, they've got to be able to play this game. So everyone else suffers. If you liked Origins combat, well, too bad for you, because everyone's going to be able to enjoy this. So I would never be expecting interesting combat in Dragon Age ever again. There's another difficulty option called Unbound though, allowing players to customize their gameplay experience to their liking. You can adjust how wayfinding helps you in-game, for instance. And I assume that they're talking about turning off, perhaps, quest markers. This never works in modern games because most of them don't do it properly. If you think of maybe an old school game where there's a quest that says, find the secret gem in a cave, in something like Morrowind, even classic World of Warcraft, you would have to read your journal, you'd have to look out for clues, maybe you'd have to look out for signposts, maybe points of interest that sort of clue you in on where you need to go to find the secret cave. But in modern games, you'll talk to the NPC, they'll give you no hints, and instead a map marker will just appear and you just follow the arrow to your destination. And then some devs will go, you can have the old school experience as well, we'll let you turn the map markers off. But then it's just like playing Where's Wally? You're just going randomly around the map looking for wherever the secret cave is. It doesn't work without the clues. And it's pretty obvious that Bioware would not do the extra work required to make this work, where your journal actually gives you clues on where to go. So talking about wayfinders, map markers, what they're doing isn't going to work. It may not even be that. They might just be talking about dumbing down things even more. Following the arrow, it's too difficult. I need you to hold my hand a little bit more. It's probably just something like that. There's even aim assist, an auto-aim option. You can adjust combat timing to make parrying easier or harder, with a balanced, forgiving, and a third harder option. You can change how much damage your enemies do to you, and how much damage you do to enemies by adjusting their health. There's also an option to adjust enemy pressure, and if you're not interested in death-related setbacks, there's no death option that you can turn on. Okay, well, if you want literally no consequences at all, the enemy can just stand there for hours pummeling away, you still won't die. Bioware are focused on what's most important, and here it is. None of these options are a cheat. Game director Bush tells me. It's an option to make sure players of all abilities can show up. It is a cheat. It was called like God mode in Nintendo 64 games where you couldn't die. That's a cheat. Just because you want to change the meaning because of your ideology and so on. No. We all know that no death is a cheat. And it's fine. At least you're not charging money for this cheat like a lot of games would do now. Any cheats, they'll cost extra. They'll be a microtransaction. But it is a cheat. Trying to pretend it's something else, it just shows their thinking. And all the accessibility stuff, some people will say, how can you complain about this? It's just giving people more options. The issue I have is when you get all these developers, they're all in this sort of mindset, this thinking where no one can be left out. We've got to design our game in such a way that no one can possibly get left out. It actually reminds me of when I was a kid, my dad would take me to the local hardware store. And I enjoyed it. It wasn't boring for me because there was this playground there and I'd wait there while he went shopping. It had a rickety bridge. There was swings to play on, little rock climbing area. It was all pretty cool. But over time, it got ruined because the safety people came in and said, the rickety bridge, no, we can't have that. You need to fix that. Just make it a wooden bridge that doesn't move at all. It can't be rickety and bouncing around and all of that. Completely just static, wooden, all the fun was gone. The swings disappeared. Someone could get hurt. They could fall off. Rock climbing, a little rock climbing area, get rid of that as well. Suddenly, I didn't like going to the hardware store anymore. It was no longer fun. And that's what's happening to Dragon Age. If you make it too accessible, all that ends up happening is you take the fun out of it. And Dragon Age isn't really fun anymore. Inquisition, it had a bunch of problems. This is just looking like making an RPG is the last thing on your mind, and all you care about is getting awards for most inclusive game of the year. The reason I have that problem, it's not because of the inclusivity settings themselves. It's because no development team has unlimited time to work on something. So if this is what you're spending your time on, every possible box ticked for obviously diversity, but also all the inclusivity as well, how much time has gone into the content, the world, the things that really matter, that gamers actually care about? That's my concern. Most of these things should be the last priority and things that you're only doing if the rest of the game is perfect and you've got some extra time up your sleeve. Something tells me that won't be the case. I have a feeling there'll be a bunch of problems and it feels like you spent time on all of this crap instead. And we finish with, she also says players can look forward to similar accessibility and approachability options that you might expect, though I'm unable to pour through Veilguard's other options to confirm exactly what's there. How about we forget about all of this and you show us more of the actual content? Show us some more gameplay. You've said that there's missions. Show us some of the higher level ones so we can see if combat even matters, if your companions matter, the skills you choose, that sort of stuff. Show us the meat of it. Something tells me that this is what they're actually passionate about. They don't care about the game, the content in there. It's got to be the most diverse. It's got to be the most accessible game of all time. If they do that, doesn't matter if you or I hate it, they'll feel like they won. That is the reality of the modern gaming industry. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.